Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to Word of Faith Responds. Thank you again for joining us. We have a very powerful program today, and we need to move pretty quickly to jump right in. Today, I have with me Ann Prince. You may remember her son shared on our program some time back. His name was Dewitt Prince, and he shared about his dad actually committing murder and going to prison. And DeWitt had a lot of struggles and ended up becoming a drug addict. And somehow his mother came in contact with our church, and she called for help, and our pastor went down there and met with DeWitt, and he came to our church, and he got free from drugs and became one of our ministers in our church. And so this is Ann Prince with us. This is DeWitt's mother, and she has one of the most amazing stories I personally have heard. I think you're going to be amazed too at how much God has brought her through so many things, unbelievable things. And so I want you to listen closely, and I believe you're going to be amazed at God's keeping power in her life. So let's jump right in and hear Ann Prince.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And thank you, Jim, for letting me be here today. And I'm just so grateful that I'm having the opportunity to share my life with everybody. I grew up in South Carolina. I was a member of a family that had three children. I was the middle child. My older sister was 5 years older than me, and my brother was 2 years younger. My dad was a farmer, and whenever I became a teenager, he ran for county council, and he was on the county council for 25 years, and actually the chairman of the board for 10 years. So my mother was very sick. She was mentally ill, and whenever I became a teenager, she was diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. So she was in pain a lot of the time and bedridden a lot of the time. But we went to church, and it was a little country church, and the Spirit of God was really at that place. And I experienced God. I knew what His Spirit was all about, and I knew even whenever I was 12 and 13 years old that I had a call of God on my life. But I graduated from high school, and I met a man named Bill Prince. And it was shortly after that I got married. I think, probably thinking back now, one of the reasons why I got married was because I was wanting to get away from the home environment. Mother being as sick as she was, and we were basically having to tend for ourselves and take care of the house and everything. But anyway, I married Bill, and it was a very short time after that I realized he was an alcoholic. So I was getting out of one thing into another. I got pregnant shortly after I got married, and during my pregnancy, I found out that he was involved with several women in the community, and I took a bottle full of sleeping pills, and I wanted to end my life. But he found me, took me to the hospital, and my stomach was pumped out, and DeWitt survived. My son, DeWitt, survived that. I had DeWitt, and then I had two other boys, John Guy and Woody, shortly after that. There was 2.5 years apart between John Guy and DeWitt, and one year between Woody and John Guy. We got married, and as the marriage continued on, the drinking got worse. And at that time, my husband was involved in a farming operation with a man whose name was Billy Graham. And that man was not married, and he actually took in my husband right after he graduated from high school. And my husband had been farming his farmland. He had numerous acres of farm land, and my husband was an overseer there, and he did quite well with the crops there, growing them, and made Mr. Billy a lot of money. But there was a lot of discord between the two of them. It was kind of like a love-hate relationship. Although I loved Mr. Billy and my children loved Mr. Billy, they actually thought of him as a grandfather. So as time went on, I want to tell you a little bit about Bill's background. When he was growing up, his parents were sharecroppers, and his father got electrocuted at a barn, picking up a wire, and Bill witnessed that. So at 12 years old, he witnessed his father actually getting electrocuted, and that was a dramatic thing that had happened in his life. But then Mr. Billy took him in, and he was living with Mr. Billy after that, and Billy was trying to be a father to him, but the relationship was just not that good. So they separated. The farming operation was separated, and Bill started farming on his own, and Mr. Billy started going and farming on his own. Bill did quite well. He went into what we call a tobacco plant bed business. He grew acres of plants, and we sold them to 4 states, and it became a booming business. We didn't actually grow the plants in the field. We just, after they got to a certain height, then that's when we sold them, and they were transplanted to the fields for other farmers. And he bought more land, and he got involved in a mobile home park, and building it, and he had a convenience store, he had a laundromat. I mean, it was just making money. And he was, then we ended up getting airplanes, buying second home at a lake, and having boats, and going on trips, and it was good times, and it was bad times. Mr. Billy was going into a financial slump, though, and he was continually asking Bill for help. And but there was things going on between them that I really didn't know all about. But I'll tell you that as we were going back to the lake and staying on the weekends, one weekend we were there, and there was a couple that lived next door to us that had bought a boat, and so we got in the boat to go with them. It was a pontoon boat, but we girls were cold, and so we asked them if they would turn around and go take us back, and we got another boat and got in our boat, and we went off across to see some friends of ours. And on the way coming back from seeing some friends, our boat collided with another boat, and there was 5 young people on that boat, and a young boy was on the bow of the boat, and he was killed. I went through the front of the boat. There was a glass walk-through, and was knocked unconscious, and my nose was peeled back. My teeth were all broken off. I had lacerations of the face. I looked like a monster, but I survived. All the rest of us in that boat survived. So it was really hard going through that, but we made it through it, and after that, I had a very close friend of mine that was living in Houston, Texas, that had leukemia, and she was dying. So I flew out to Houston to be with her when she was dying. And after the funeral, I just had this dreadful feeling that came over me. And I told someone that was with me at the time, I said, I've just got this feeling. I don't know what's getting ready to happen, but I feel like something's getting ready to happen. Well, I thought possibly that something was going to happen to my mom, because at that time she was just getting worse mentally, and I was having to spend a lot of time with her. I didn't know how to help her, but Anyway, several days after that, I got sick, and I had to go to the hospital, and I had to have some surgery, minor surgery. And at Dread, it was there. I had some friends to come to see me after I had the surgery in the hospital, and I told them about the same thing. I said, I just had this dreadful feeling something's getting ready to happen. And so my boys were 17, 15, and 13 at that time, and they came up to the hospital that night to see me and visit with me. They stayed until after visiting hours, and then they started back home, and I went to sleep. But I woke up like 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was having this excruciating pain, doubled over with pain. And I called the nurse, and I said, please call my husband and tell him to come. I'm just hurting so bad I can't hardly stand it. Not knowing that outside the door of the hospital was my dad, my brother, and my pastor. And they were waiting to come in to tell me that there had been an accident and that my 2 sons, John Guy and Woody, had died in the accident, and that Dewitt was in critical condition in ICU at another hospital, fighting for his life. My husband, they could not find at the time, so he wasn't there, but he came in later. And when he came in, he said, Ann, I was at home. Ann, I was at home. You see, I had told him that when he went off drinking on his binges and he would stay gone for days and I wouldn't know where he was, I told him if anything ever happened to my boys and he wasn't there, I wouldn't forgive him. So he was letting me know that he was at home. Somebody had dropped him off at the house, and they didn't have it wasn't in transportation there at the house. And so they thought he wasn't at home, and they couldn't find him. But somebody called the house, a friend, and he answered the phone, and they told him that what had happened, and he came to the hospital. So it was a hard thing to go through. Very hard. Losing John Guy and Woody and Dewitt in the hospital. When I went home, it was to a very empty house. And when Dewitt got out of the hospital and started getting better, he moved out of the house. And so it was like I had lost all 3 of my sons at one time. So I started going to counselors and to doctors trying to get help because I was really having problems sleeping at night. And so they put me on antidepressants. And back then, antidepressants were really strong antidepressants. Not like it is today, but anyway. I got on the antidepressants, and it was shortly after that my mother committed suicide. So I was even needing more then to go through that. In the meantime, Mr. Billy was still having a lot of financial problems, and so my husband and 2 other businessmen were trying to help him. And it turned out to be a very sour deal. And Mr. Billy took my husband and the 2 men to court and won. Mr. Billy had filed $1 million suit against them, and he got $800,000. Meantime, my husband had lymphoma, and he was taking chemo through all of this.
Now this is the Mr. Billy that that raised your
Actually,
husband,
my husband
Bill.
went to live with,
Okay.
right after he graduated from high school.
And
That's right.
And so they actually had a business dispute, and Mr. Billy ends up suing your husband and gets a judgment for $800,000.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, after that, Bill and I were at home, and we had a phone call about 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was the policeman where we lived. And he said, "Ann, is Billy Graham in his house? His house is on fire." And I said to my husband, "Bill, is Billy home? His house is on fire." We jumped up, got in the car, and ran up to the house, and the house was engulfed in flames. And after the fire department got there and out of the fire, we found out Mr. Billy had died in the fire. And I got that same dread feeling, because I knew that Bill was probably going to be the one that was going to be charged later on, and that happened. That's exactly what happened. He was charged for the murder. So we went through a major trial. I mean, it was headlines all over. And it was a lot of talk, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of things that we were going through.
Was there so during the investigation about the fire, you mentioned that there was 2 other men?
That's right. One was a mayor and one was a banker.
And these were the 3 men involved in this business deal with Mr. Billy?
That's correct.
Did either...
No, they were involved with Bill and with trying to help Mr. Billy.
Okay. Did either... You mentioned that your husband was charged with this murder
That's
of Mr.
correct.
Billy. Was either of the other 2 men charged with
One
murder?
of them didn't even go to the trial, and the other one got off.
Okay.
And Bill was the only one that was charged with murder and got a life sentence. And he immediately appealed it. And whenever he appealed it, what happened next was he fled the country. He went to the West Indies.
Okay, when he appealed it, he was able to make a bond of some sort and get released.
$200,000 that a friend went on for him, and he fled the country and went to the West Indies. Now, during this time, the farming operation, I mean, we had lost our lake house by that time because of all the money that was being put into lawyer fees, the airplane, the boats, but we did still have the farms. And Dewitt was left to take care of the farms. And he was trying to manage it the best way he knew how to manage it. But then Bill's brother, Don, got involved with it. And Bill and Don were talking about how they needed things to be run and what all. And then it got to be disputes between Bill's brother, and Dewitt.
Now, Bill is in the West Indies at this time. He's running from the law, and he's just communicating with his brother and your son about running this business?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the FBI was watching us. I mean, he was right down the road from where I lived, watching me, and he was watching Dewitt. And, of course, Dewitt was in contact with his daddy. I didn't have contact with him during that time. But then the next thing that happened was that when Bill was in prison, Bill got caught by the feds. He came back to the United States from the West Indies, and he eventually got caught. I think this was like a year and a half all this went on. And he got caught by the feds, and he was put into prison. Actually, they put him in a prison very close to where I could go and visit him almost any time I wanted to go. But he was so bitter and so angry about what had happened to him. I mean, he it was just trouble everywhere he went, and he would get put from one prison to another prison, and and he was frustrated because he couldn't get out and run his business, and he didn't want. Dewitt was not doing exactly what he wanted him to be doing, and then Don was trying to tell DeWitt what to be doing, and it was crazy. It was crazy. That's all I can say. It was crazy. But anyway, he ended up getting 20 more years plus a life in sentence, and then lymphoma reoccurred while he was in prison. So he was fighting for his life, but he was still so angry that he was actually conspiring with his brother and another man that was getting out of prison to kill the man that was supposed to be on trial, that was supposed to have gotten a life sentence along with him, that didn't get anything, and another man, and also my son. All three of those were on a list, I guess what you call a hit list, and we found out about it. They found out about it, and so Bill's brother got 17 years of prison, and he went to prison
for conspiring to kill your son and these other people.
That's correct.
Okay.
Meantime, during all of this, DeWitt had actually gotten hooked on prescription drugs whenever he was in the hospital. And that was in 1981. And his drug habit eventually got worse. He lost his farm. He lost everything he had, practically. And it got really bad to the point where I didn't know whether I was going to get a call that he had overdosed or not. He was having very little to do with me at the time because he knew he was doing wrong, and he knew it was hurting me. So our relationship basically deteriorated. But one night I got a phone call, and it was from him, and he said, "Mom, I need help." I was so grateful that he called me. And so I said, "Okay, come on, and we'll get you help." And so I started trying to find help for him. I had a very good friend that knew Sam and Jane Whaley. And they told me that they would get in touch with Sam and ask Sam and Jane if there was any possibility of DeWitt coming to Word of Faith Fellowship. They sent me word that they were praying about it and that they would let me know. So it was just shortly after that they came, Douglas MacDonald and Sam, and they talked to me, and they told me all about what was going on with the church even back then, how they were being criticized, and they wanted me to know what was being told. And I did not have any qualms at all about that. I felt a peace about Sam. I felt a peace about Douglas. Two men that had left their home to come to get my son to help him, and I was so grateful. And DeWitt told them that he wanted to go, because Sam said, "DeWitt, I'll go and spend the night off, and I'll come back, and you tell me whether you want." He said, "No, I want to go now." I was so grateful. So he came up to North Carolina, and he moved in with Douglas and Ann, Douglas MacDonald and Ann MacDonald.
And Douglas is one of the ministers at the Word of Faith.
Douglas is
too.
a minister here at the Word of Faith, yes. And they took him in their home, and Douglas was a father to him like he had never had. Ann was a mother to him like he never had. And I immediately started seeing a change in him. I started coming up. The first time I walked in the church, I felt so much love from the people. I mean, it was like I already knew them. That's how I felt. I felt like I was at home. The singing was different from what I'd ever heard, but I loved it. Because we did singing at the churches where I was when I was a child. But the preaching that Jane Whaley preached, I mean, it was straight from the Bible. I mean, you had to know the books of the Bible to keep up with her. And she spoke straight from the Bible, and she gave us truth from the Bible. That was what I needed to hear. I had not cried for years, and I just started crying and weeping because I felt the presence of God there. That's what I felt as a small child, and I knew that I was at a place that I needed to be. And so eventually, Dewitt got married Andra, and they wanted me to come and live with them. So they asked me if I would come and live with them. Well, my dad was very ill at that time. He was 96. My sister had already died. My mother had died, so it was just my dad and I, because my brother had Parkinson's, and he was having to be taken care of round the clock, so he couldn't help with my dad. So my dad ended up dying, and then I came here, and I moved in with Dewitt and Andra, and I have been very happy. My life has completely changed. I started getting prayer. I had been on antidepressants for 30 years. Your personality changes when you take those things. You become a different person. And I knew that was happening to me. But I started immediately getting prayer. And I mean, prayer, I'm telling you, that prayer, it works. I am an example of that. I'm telling you, it works. That's why the devil hates it so much, because it has brought so much deliverance to us in our church. We are grateful for that prayer. The devil hates it, but we are grateful because it's changed our lives. I started helping in the school system here. I went to Africa for 2 years and helped over there in the school system where our church is there. My life has been so fulfilled with love. My relationship with my son has been restored. I am a very happy person. And anybody that knew me in my other life and know me now, that there has been a change in my life as well as in my son's life. I mean, it's like the difference of day and night. So,
thank you so much, Ann. What a miracle. What a miracle we have just heard. An unimaginable series of events that Miss Prince went through, and we really have just heard an absolute miracle about God's restoring power. Isn't it amazing that God can take somebody through everything that Ann Prince went through,
yes,
and somehow just bring her now where she's sharing with you about the restoring power of God and how happy she is,
and the grace of God,
and God's grace.
Yes.
Only Jesus can bring somebody through all of that and bring somebody here today to tell you how happy she is. Only Jesus can do that.
That's right.
And we just thank you for listening. We want to remind you that we have a website. It's wordoffaithfellowship.org. We have all our radio programs. We've been doing this now for over 3 months, and if you want to hear more testimonies, you can go back actually and hear Dewitt's testimony, your son's, and please go listen to that, and thank you again for listening.